In 64 AD, the most powerful empire on earth began secretly shaving silver from its own coins, and within 220 years, those coins were worth less than the copper inside them. It wasn't war that broke Rome, it wasn't famine or plague or even the barbarian armies pressing at the borders. It was something far quieter, far more insidious, and far more deliberate. It was the money. Specifically, it was what Rome did to its money when the bills became too large to pay honestly. On the floor of the Roman mint, probably sometime in the early months of 64 AD, craftsmen received new instructions from Emperor Nero, and the denarius, Rome's silver coin, used by legions, merchants, and senators alike for over 4 centuries, would be subtly reduced, slightly lighter, slightly less pure, just enough to go unnoticed. Nobody rioted, nobody even noticed, and that was the plan. But what followed was one of the most catastrophic economic destructions in recorded history, a slow-motion collapse spanning 2 centuries, accelerating into a death spiral of inflation, political chaos, and total currency failure that wiped out the savings of millions. It fractured the greatest trade network the ancient world had ever built, and right now, the exact same pattern is unfolding. This wasn't bad luck, and this wasn't unique to Rome. Economic historian Joseph Tainter, in his landmark 1988 study, The Collapse of Complex Societies, identified a recurring pattern that appears before every major monetary collapse in history. And in 2012, historian Adrian Goldsworthy's forensic analysis of Rome's fall reinforced what Tainter found, the same sequence, playing out across centuries and civilizations with mathematical precision. Let me show you how it works. The pattern has 5 stages, and Tainter called it the complexity trap. I'm going to call it what it actually is, the debasement spiral, because every collapse follows this same downward rotation. Stage 1 is overextension. The state expands beyond what its honest revenues can sustain, and military commitments, social programs, infrastructure, and bureaucracy create obligations too large for the tax base to fund without printing or debasing currency. Stage 2 is silent debasement. Rather than cutting commitments or raising taxes to politically dangerous levels, the state begins quietly reducing the purity or increasing the supply of money. Designed to be invisible, while the official story remains that everything is fine. Stage 3 is price acceleration. Merchants and traders begin to notice as prices rise first slowly, then with gathering speed, and the explanation offered by officials is always external. Drought, war, foreign speculators, never the coin itself. Stage 4 is currency flight. People begin rejecting the official currency in favor of older, purer coins, precious metals, or direct barter. The state doubles down on debasement to compensate for declining revenue, and the spiral accelerates. Stage 5 is system fracture. The trade network that depended on a trusted currency collapses, supply chains break, urban centers lose population, and only the self-sufficient survive intact. The pattern is mathematical, and the stages are consistent across history, across cultures, across centuries. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and right now, if you listen carefully, you can already hear the rhythm. But there's one stage more dangerous than all the others, stage 4, the feedback loop, and we'll come back to that, because it's the stage that turns a bad situation into an unrecoverable one. First, let's look at the evidence and watch the debasement spiral destroy civilizations one by one, beginning with Rome itself. By the reign of Nero, Rome's obligations were staggering. The legions stationed along the Rhine, the Danube, and across the eastern frontier required constant payment, and the bread doles for the urban poor, the annona, had to be maintained to prevent riot. Nero himself was engaged in an enormous building program following the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, including the infamous Domus Aurea, his golden palace, and the treasury was under severe pressure. According to numismatic historian Kenneth Harl, whose 1996 study, Coinage and the Roman Economy, remains the definitive work on this subject, Roman state expenditure by the mid-1st century exceeded revenues by a growing margin. Nero's response was surgical and concealed. He reduced the weight of the silver denarius from approximately 3.9 grams to 3.4 grams, and reduced its silver purity from 95% to roughly 90%. The change was invisible to the naked eye, and Roman citizens, accustomed to trusting the imperial mint, continued accepting coins at face value. This was the beginning. Over the next 200 years, emperor after emperor made the same calculation. Vespasian reduced purity further, Septimius Severus dropped silver content to around 50% to fund his military campaigns, and by the time of Gallienus in the 260s AD, the denarius contained less than 2% silver. What had once been a solid silver coin was now a bronze core with a thin silver wash. The crisis of the 3rd century deserves a moment of its own. In just 50 years, 235 AD to 284 AD, the Roman Empire saw over 50 different men claim the title of emperor, most dying violently, and each new claimant needed to pay his army to keep power. Each payment required new coins, each new coin was more debased than the last, and the spiral had entered its most dangerous phase. Political instability and monetary collapse feeding each other in a loop that neither could interrupt. According to data compiled by historian David Sear in Roman Coins and Their Values, the denarius lost approximately 98% of its silver content between 64 AD and 274 AD. Read that again, 98%. The inflation that followed was documented in explicit detail by the Edict on Maximum Prices, issued by Emperor Diocletian in 301 AD in a desperate attempt to cap prices by law. According to the analysis of economist Robert Allen, published in the Journal of Roman Archaeology in 2009, prices across core commodities in Roman Egypt rose by over 3,000% between the 1st and 3rd centuries, while wages lagged catastrophically and real purchasing power collapsed. Consider what that meant for an ordinary Roman citizen, a soldier, a craftsman, a shopkeeper, whose salary had been adequate in their father's time, but now bought a fraction of what it once did. Diocletian's price controls made things worse. Merchants stopped bringing goods to market rather than sell at a loss. Shortages appeared and black markets emerged. The state insisted the currency had value. The merchants disagreed, and the merchants were right. Merchants across the empire, particularly in Egypt and the eastern provinces, where papyrus records survive in extraordinary detail, began refusing debased coins. And archaeological evidence from Oxyrhynchus in Egypt shows merchants explicitly requesting payment in older, purer coins, in gold solida, or in commodities directly. Hoards discovered across Britain, Gaul, and the Rhineland consistently show the same pattern. Older, high-purity denarii buried and hidden, while debased new coins were circulated and spent as quickly as possible. People were following what economists today call Gresham's Law, where bad money drives out good. Rome's internal trade network, one of the most sophisticated in the ancient world, spanning 50,000 miles of paved roads and connecting grain from North Africa to legions on the Rhine, began to fragment. Without a trusted currency, long-distance trade requires either barter or credit, and neither could substitute efficiently for money. According to archaeologist Brian Ward Perkins, in The Fall of Rome and the End of Civilization, urban populations in many Roman cities declined by 50 to 90% between the 3rd and 6th centuries, and Londinium, Roman London, shrank from an estimated 60,000 residents at its peak to a few thousand by the 5th century. But the pattern doesn't end with Rome, and this is where it gets relentless. Germany emerged from World War I with crippling reparation payments imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, ultimately totaling 132 billion gold marks, and the Weimar Republic's obligations vastly exceeded its capacity to generate hard revenue. The German government began printing marks aggressively starting in 1921, and the money supply expansion was framed as necessary stimulus, while economists and officials insisted the situation was manageable. According to Federal Reserve historical records, German prices rose by approximately 322 billion% between January 1919 and November 1923, and a loaf of bread that cost 163 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks by November of that same year. Workers were paid twice daily because prices rose faster than they could get to the shop, and wheelbarrows of cash were needed for basic groceries. Germans who could fled the mark, converting to foreign currencies, dollars, Swiss francs, anything with hard backing, and factories began paying wages partly in goods such as potatoes and coal because the currency was losing value between paycheck and the store. The German middle class, people whose entire savings existed in mark-denominated bank accounts, bonds, and insurance policies, was effectively wiped out. And according to historian Adam Ferguson in When Money Dies, the psychological destruction of the German savings class in 1923 created the social conditions that made the political catastrophe of the 1930s possible. What survived were hard assets. People who owned farms, factories, gold, or foreign currency accounts preserved their wealth, and the pattern had played out identically to Rome. The currency was different, the outcome was the same. Hungary in 1946 stands as the most extreme currency collapse ever recorded. After World War II, the Hungarian pengo was destroyed through government money printing, and according to the International Monetary Fund's historical analysis, Hungary's peak monthly inflation rate in July 1946 reached 41.9 quintillion%. The government eventually introduced new currency at a conversion rate of 400 octillion pengo to 1 forint, and the wealth preserved was again land, gold, tools, and skill. The pattern appeared again in Zimbabwe from 2000 to 2009. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe printed money to fund land redistribution and military expenditure, and Stage 1 through Stage 5 unfolded in under a decade. The Zimbabwe dollar required $100 trillion notes to function by 2009, notes so worthless the government printed them and the people refused to use them. And what survived was gold, foreign currency, cattle, and farmland. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, Stage 4, Stage 5, every time, without exception. Now here's where it gets disturbing. Every single stage of this pattern is present today, not in some distant emerging market, not in a post-war economy struggling to rebuild, but in the United States of America, the issuer of the world's reserve currency, where the debasement spiral is underway. The United States federal government currently carries $35 trillion in national debt. Pause on that number. $35 trillion. According to Congressional Budget Office projections published in February 2024, mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on existing debt will consume 100% of projected federal tax revenues by 2034. And every discretionary dollar spent on defense and infrastructure would require new borrowing. The CBO's own baseline projection shows debt reaching $54 trillion by 2034 under current policy, and the United States is structurally committed to spending more than it can honestly collect. This is stage 1, textbook overextension. Rome shaved silver from coins. The United States creates digital dollars. And between 2020 and 2022, the Federal Reserve expanded the M2 money supply by approximately 40%, from $15.4 trillion to $21.7 trillion in under 2 years, the largest 2-year monetary expansion in peacetime American history. According to Federal Reserve data, total assets on the Fed's balance sheet reached a peak of $8.9 trillion in 2022 compared to $900 billion before the 2008 financial crisis. The debasement is not silver shavings, it is keystrokes, but the mechanism is identical. The phrase used by officials, quantitative easing, accommodative monetary policy, providing liquidity, is the same reassurance offered in every stage 2 in history, and in 64 AD they called it monetary reform. The coin looked the same, the silver was gone. Between January 2021 and June 2022, U.S. consumer price inflation reached a peak of 9.1%, the highest in 40 years according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and grocery prices rose 13.5%. Egg prices rose 60%, while housing costs measured by the Case-Shiller National Home Price Index rose over 40% from 2020 to 2022. The official explanation focused on supply chain disruptions and energy prices, and rarely mentioned was the 40% expansion of the money supply in the preceding 24 months. The same signals that preceded every stage 3 in history were present: elevated prices, official explanations pointing elsewhere, and a public that felt the squeeze but couldn't name the cause. Central banks worldwide have been quietly accelerating their gold purchases, and according to the World Gold Council's 2023 annual report, global central bank gold purchases reached 1,037 tons in 2022, the highest level recorded since 1967, while in 2023 purchases remained above 1,000 tons for the second consecutive year, a streak not seen in over half a century. The BRICS nations have been actively discussing alternatives to U.S. dollar settlement. China and Russia have already shifted portions of bilateral trade to yuan and rubles, and Saudi Arabia, the anchor of petrodollar dominance since 1974, has been in discussions with multiple nations regarding oil sales in non-dollar currencies. This is not fringe analysis. This is documented by the IMF, the Bank for International Settlements, and the Federal Reserve itself. And right now, as I'm recording this, the parallels are mathematical. Stage 4 is not fully realized. Currency flight in the U.S. context would mean the loss of reserve currency status, a slow process measured in decades, but the trajectory is undeniable. Stage 5 has not yet arrived in full, but here's what nobody is telling you. Stage 5 never announces itself. It is the consequence of stages 1 through 4, and it arrives when confidence collapses faster than institutions can respond. In Rome, stage 5 took 2 centuries to complete after stage 1 began. In Weimar Germany, it took 5 years, in Zimbabwe 8 years, and the variable is always the speed of stage 4. The people who survived every historical collapse weren't smarter than the people who were destroyed. They were better positioned, and that is the entire lesson of 2,000 years of monetary history. The 4 categories of wealth that survived Rome's collapse were not Roman and not unique to the ancient world. They appear again in Weimar Germany, in Hungary 1946, in Zimbabwe 2008, and in every monetary collapse ever studied. In Rome, the great landowners of the late empire, the latifundia owners, survived the monetary chaos because their land produced food regardless of what the denarius was worth, and when currency fails, caloric production becomes its own currency. In Weimar Germany, farmers were among the few who were unambiguously better off than their urban neighbors during the hyperinflationary peak, and the Romans who hoarded older high-purity denarii and gold auri while spending the debased coins saw their wealth preserved, directly documented by coin hoards unearthed across the former Roman Empire. Craftsmen, physicians, builders, blacksmiths, and farmers in Rome retained value that could not be inflated away. Their labor was purchased with food, with goods, with arrangements that had nothing to do with the official currency. In every collapse, skill becomes a currency unto itself, and the regions of the former Roman Empire that recovered fastest were those with strong pre-existing local infrastructures, capable of producing food, maintaining water, and trading within walking distance. The assets that went to zero were equally consistent. Cash savings held in the official currency, urban commercial enterprises dependent on long-distance trade, and financial promises denominated in the failing currency. Pensions, government contracts, annuities, completely predictable, completely documented, completely ignored. The people who were destroyed in Rome in the 3rd century weren't stupid, they were unprepared. The people who lost everything in Weimar Germany in 1923 weren't foolish, they were unprepared. And the middle-class Zimbabweans who watched a lifetime of savings become worthless were not ignorant of economics, they were unprepared. Nobody warned them, nobody organized a press conference, nobody sent a letter. The process happened gradually, then suddenly, in a phrase that Hemingway applied to bankruptcy, but which applies with equal precision to every monetary collapse in history. The Congressional Budget Office has projected U.S. debt interest payments will reach $1.6 trillion per year by 2034. Not total debt, just the interest. And that figure would represent roughly 25% of all projected federal revenue, paid simply to service the cost of obligations already accumulated. Based on Tainter's pattern analysis and the trajectory of stages 1 through 4, the 2027 to 2032 window represents the period of highest systemic risk, not necessarily for a sudden collapse, but for what economists call a confidence event, a moment when the self-reinforcing cycle of stage 4 accelerates beyond the institutional capacity to manage it. That doesn't mean catastrophe is inevitable, and history also shows us that empires which made structural reforms before stage 4 became entrenched survived longer. Rome could have stopped the spiral under Aurelius, but it did not. This is educational content, not financial advice. The pattern is documented, the data is public, and the decision about what to do with it belongs to you. But before you decide, consider this. The Romans who survived the monetary collapse weren't the ones who trusted the official story. They were the ones who understood that when a currency loses its anchor, the things that have real value, land, food, skill, community metal, retain that value regardless of what any government says is money. The denarius was once the most trusted coin in the known world. Rome's legions carried it across 3 continents. Merchants from Carthage to Ctesiphon priced their goods in it. And then one day, a coin collector lifted a late 3rd century denarius from the ground and saw what it had become. A bronze core with a ghost of silver washing, a promise so eroded it was barely worth the metal it had replaced. The Roman Empire did not ask its citizens permission to do that to their savings. And history never asks permission, it just repeats. This video is for educational and historical purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. All data cited is drawn from published academic research, government sources, and documented historical records. Viewers are encouraged to conduct independent research and consult qualified financial professionals regarding their personal financial situation.